Chapter 8 Confrontations. A painful yell echoed through the trees as Geode clutched his arm. The sounds of voices yelling and leaves rustling took over the silence that had once prevailed. "Use the light," Uthrin commanded, opening his second mind in a fraction of a second. "Protect yourselves and get out of here." Silas stumbled back slightly at the sight of the arrow protruding from Geode's arm, his stomach turning over as a sickening feeling started to fill his throat. A golden glow, like a newly formed sun, lit the area around them as Uthrin radiated with the holy power of light. His powerful voice filled the air as he charged towards the incoming attackers. Geode let out a muffled grunt as he slowly moved his hands in front of his chest, creating a symbol that Silas had never seen before. Less than a second later, Geode's hands and eyes started glowing with a deep, vibrant red. Silas could almost feel the power that radiated off the warrior, his eyes ablaze as though his soul had just caught flame. His hands were like burning logs as he raised one powerful hand towards his injured shoulder. Geode's muscles bulged, nearly ripping the fabric of his robes. He reached his flame-lit hand towards the arrow, grabbed its shaft, and without even wincing, tore the arrow straight from the flesh of his shoulder. His shoulder poured blood, the wound deep and gnarly. Silas himself nearly fainted at the scene, empathetically feeling the pain in his own shoulder. Geode rose to his full height, a flaming warrior that showed absolutely no sign of pain. Bringing his hands back together, Geode twisted his fingers into the symbol of light, and his eyes and hands changed from red to bright yellow. Silas could tell by the look on his face that as he switched to using light magic, the terrible damage that the arrow had caused was now sending its pain signals through Geode's body with a vengeance. Placing a light-shrouded hand upon the wound, a warm, healing glow began to mend his shoulder. His tense face softened as the healing finished, and he quickly brought his hands back to his chest and created the symbol of nature. Eyes and hands glowing a powerful green, he flashed his gaze towards Silas and Samara, then set them upon Torin. "Remember your training. Try to avoid conflict at all costs. Protect them, Torin. I'm counting on you." The ground beneath his feet began to rumble, and a pile of dirt and rock lifted him from the ground and threw him in the air towards the incoming enemies. Their two protectors gone, Samara's breathing became frantic. "Hey, Samara," Torin said, grabbing her wrists. "Listen to me. Everything's going to be all right, okay? Silas and I got you. You hear me?" Samara was on the verge of tears, her body visibly shaking. She returned Torin's gaze, then slowly looked over towards Silas. Silas swallowed, but Torin's words brought the additional courage that he needed. "That's right," he said, his voice wavering slightly. "We won't let anything happen to you. Stay close. Let's get out of here." Bringing his hands together, he made the symbol of light and opened his second mind. The strange feeling of having 2 points of view came as his second mind opened. The power of light, along with its fury of the evil around him, filled his body as his eyes and hands glowed with its holy power. He focused his desires until they were in unison with the light and created a circular shield that covered the length of his arm. He moved his arm left and right, and was pleased that the shield floated alongside him as if it were physically attached. He then drew his sword and readied himself for a fight. "Stay between us," he called to Samara. "Torin, let's go." Torin spun his sword in the air, his back to Samara so he could cover her flank. "Way ahead of you, brother." Silas looked once more at Samara's cowering face. The light flared within him as the desire to protect her from harm grew tenfold. Embracing the call for justice from the light, he let a battle cry fill the air, then charged. Silas found that the ethereal body of his second mind floated just above him and behind him, as if it were attached to him with a rope, never drifting too far away. He used this additional viewpoint to his advantage, and took a survey of his surroundings. The light in his eyes seemed to enhance his vision, allowing him to see in the dark with much greater ease. His second mind caught a glimpse of the archer that had fired the arrow into Geode's shoulder. Feeding the light's desire to enact holy vengeance on the evildoer, his shield flared with light, and Silas ran towards the man. He flashed his vision back towards Torin and Samara, but Torin's instincts were sharp. He quickly rotated around her, allowing Silas to break off to try and take this enemy out. The archer saw the oncoming assault and nocked another arrow. Silas held his shield in front of his body as the archer shot the arrow towards him. Wincing as the arrow approached, he prayed that the missile wouldn't go right through the shield and into his chest. To his satisfaction, the arrow bounced off his shield of light and flew, spinning through the air. A slight ripple of light waved through the energy of the shield after the arrow struck its surface. Confidence surged within him at the successful block from his shield. With a slightly more worried look on his face, the archer pulled another arrow from his back and nocked it. Silas was not far from the man now. Like a silent whisper, the light suggested his next actions, and Silas happily complied. Raising his shield arm up and flaring his magic, he emanated a blinding flash of light towards the archer. Just as the archer was about to release his arrow, the light coming from Silas's shield hit his eyes. He reared back in pain, and the arrow shot high into the air, missing its intended target. The archer dropped his bow and held his hands to his face in agony. Silas took advantage of the opportunity that he had created and closed the gap between them. Slashing his sword at the man's torso, he cut right through the light leather armor that he had been wearing and sliced a huge gash into his stomach. Blood poured from the wound as the man took his hands from his face and pressed them against his now open stomach. As the archer removed his hands from his face, Silas was surprised to see that his blinding light attack had done more damage than he'd thought. He intended to blind the man, giving himself an advantage for the rest of the fight, but saw that along with the blinding, the light had also burned the man's face to a crisp. The man fell to his knees, then face down on the ground. With the light coursing through him, Silas could almost feel when the archer took his last breath. The light within him suggested he offer a quick prayer, which Silas did, wishing for his confused soul to receive safe passage to the heavenly gates of the afterlife. Shock immediately entered into his mind after the prayer, the realization that, for the very first time in his life, he had just taken the life of someone else away. His heart felt sick, his stomach bubbling, but the light within him immediately flared, calming his mind and easing his conscience. It reminded him that his intentions were noble, that his cause was just. It spoke into his heart that his quest was one of great integrity, and those who stood in his way and tried to stop his quest for peace needed to be vanquished. Darkness must perish, so that the light can spread across the land once more. He'd said it out loud, to no one but himself. Swallowing his regret, he knew that it was right, so he focused his eyes on his next target. Torin parried the incoming blade to the side as his opponent swung it down towards his head. He resisted the urge to do a spin move and go for the decapitating blow, then instead kicked at the man's shin as hard as he could. Torin's foot made contact with the unarmored bone of the man's shin, causing him to hop backward and bend forward slightly. Torin dropped his left hand from the hilt of his sword and swung it upward, connecting it to the man's jaw with a crunch. Torin shook his hand as the man fell backward onto the ground. "Yeah, that's going to be swollen for a while," he thought. The man spat blood onto the ground and looked back up at Torin, who, meeting his gaze, gave a taunting smile. The man smiled back and wiped the blood from his mouth. "You honestly think you have a chance, boy? I'm just getting warmed up." Torin gave a disrespectful shrug and a fake yawn. "You know, I have a sister that I fight with at home, and to be honest, she's usually done more damage than you have by now." The man chuckled. "Is that so? Well then, I don't think you'll mind if I turn up the heat a little bit." Torin pointed the blade towards the man, lowering his stance slightly as he had seen his father do during countless training sessions. "Bring it." The man chuckled again, spitting a drop of blood at the ground as he pushed himself to his feet. "All right, you asked for it." The man sheathed his sword. He pulled his hands in front of his chest and made a strange symbol. His laughter grew deeper and more menacing as a red, fiery glow began to surround his hands and sparked deep within his eyes. Torin swallowed, lowering his stance. "What? You don't want to fight me like a man?" "Oh, you'll get your honorable death. There's more to fire than just shooting flames." The warrior flexed his muscles, his chest and arms doubling their size in mere moments. The flames in his eyes grew wild, as if they were wildfires on the verge of becoming uncontrollable. "Let's see you best me in this state, boy. I'll even give you an advantage." The crazed man tossed his sword to the ground, several feet away from where he stood. He bent his head backward, laughing into the air. He then pointed a finger at Torin, flames dancing in his eyes and around his fiery fists. "Come at me, if you dare." Torin took in several deep breaths, desperately summoning his courage. He took a quick glance backward. Samara was gone. She'd probably found a good place to hide until the action was over. Growling into the air for courage, he took several steps forward, increasing his speed with each step, then with all his strength, slashed his sword downward at the man. Sparks fluttered from the man's eyes as he reached one hand forward, catching the blade in the palm of his hand. Torin's breath caught in his throat, his eyes growing wide with fear. The blade had nearly severed the hand, sinking deeply into the slightly red glowing flesh. The man smiled, his eyes completely void of pain. The red in his eyes burned like a forest fire, rage and power consuming what used to be his pupils. "What's the matter, boy? Is that all you've got?" Torin yanked his sword from the man's grasp, cutting his hand more with the action. His mind raced, trying to come up with a solution to his deadly problem. The man laughed, mocking Torin's surprise. "Come on, boy. Be a man. Attack me. Show me what you've got. Where's all that talk now?" Torin took in several rapid breaths, his lips pressing together tightly. He ran at the maniac, thrusting his sword with everything he had, aiming for the top of his head. Again, the man caught his blade as if it were nothing, this time with his other hand. The sword again penetrated his hand completely, giving him a wound that should bring any sane person to their knees in pain. The man's biceps bulged, the veins in his arms visibly pumping his enraged blood throughout his body. "I'm disappointed. You seemed so sure of yourself just a moment ago." Gripping Torin's sword with his bloody hand, the enraged man yanked it from Torin's grasp. In a motion too swift to follow, he slammed his fist into Torin's stomach with so much power that it threw him high into the night air. Torin's lungs choked, air refusing to enter as he soared through the night sky. Stars glittered in the edges of his vision as he slammed onto the ground after several seconds of flight time. His body fought to stay conscious as he slowly slid to a stop, the entire front of his body agonizingly broken. The surety of a slow, agonizing death flooded his mind. The sound of pounding footsteps approached. Cold, maniacal laughing squeezed its way into his ears, unrelenting. The powerful man bent down over Torin, his flaming red eyes burning with torturous desires. He reached out and grabbed Torin by the neck, lifting him up off the ground, high above his head with one arm, as he continued to laugh. His face then hardened, hatred and disgust forming on his expression. "Too bad. Guess it takes only one little punch to take you out. I was hoping to show you more." Torin tried to pull his hands to his neck, to do anything to defend himself, but his body refused. The man pulled his fist back, yelling with delight as he threw his fist forward towards Torin's face. Torin closed his eyes, awaiting what would surely be this life-taking blow to strike him. Just as his eyes closed, the blacks of his eyelids turned red, as if he had just turned his head towards the light of the sun. Torin opened his eyes. An angel stood behind the man, pointing her beautiful, life-saving hand towards Torin. No, it wasn't an angel. Samara stood behind the man, her eyes and hands glowing with the color of light magic. A glowing yellow shield of light surrounded Torin's entire body. Torin felt the sensation of flying through the air once more as he was angrily tossed to the side. He thudded against the ground once more, his vision fading to darkness. Samara stood in front of the hulking man, her heart beating so fast she was afraid it would explode. She glanced to her right and saw Uthrin and Geode again, both fighting against what seemed an entire army of enemies. It looked like Melos had sent fire mages after them this time. Bright pillars of flame exploded into the air, splashing against beams of yellow and green magic. As the fire and light magic connected, sparks of lightning crackled across the sky. leaving behind them booms of thunder. Samara decided that she needed to ask Uthrin about this interaction, as soon as this nightmare of a night was over. She had no idea where Silas was. Last she saw him, he was chasing after another one of the archers that were firing arrows at both Uthrin and Geode.
"You'll pay dearly for that, missy. I was going to enjoy smashing that ignorant pup's face in. You took that moment away from me, and for that you will pay."
The man looked into the sky and buffed his body up again, the red aura surrounding his skin glowing slightly brighter now. Samara could have sworn she saw a slight jet of flame escape his mouth and nostrils as he enhanced the spell. The man took several steps to the side, reaching towards the ground. He retrieved his sword, then held it high into the air. The blade of the sword ignited with a bright red flame, sending a heat wave towards her. Terror gripped at her heart as she lifted the shield from Torin's body and placed it around herself. Somehow, I've got to get over there and heal Torin before it's too late.
"Your pathetic shields won't be able to withstand my onslaught. You will soon face the same fate as your friend. And once we've killed you all, we shall bring the stone back to the Dark Mage, and he will bathe the world in darkness."
With a yell, the man began running towards her, flaming sword held high above his head. Samara felt her blood ice over. In her mind, she immediately pled with the light that flowed within her. I trust your judgment and agree with whatever you decide. Just get me out of this mess. Samara felt almost as if her second mind cracked its neck with a smile. Giving in to each and every suggestion that was sent to her, as well as allowing her body to seemingly be controlled by the power of her second mind, Samara raised her hands above her head. A yell escaped her lungs as the shield that surrounded her exploded outward in a dome shape. The light struck the man, and although it didn't knock him completely over, sent him off his original course as he stumbled to maintain balance. Samara held both hands outstretched to her side and filled them with balls of light. Bringing her hands together, she cupped the balls together near her waist, continuing to pour light energy into the palms of her hands. Gaining his footing, the man turned and bolted towards Samara, flames streaming from his glowing eyes as if they were dripping molten lava. Without giving herself the chance of having second thoughts, she obeyed completely whatever the light commanded her to do. She extended her arms in front of her, releasing a powerful beam of light towards the man. The light ray rippled through the air, striking the man in the left shoulder, her aim just slightly off. It sent him spinning through the air, launching him backward to the ground. The man cursed under his breath, then stood, revealing the grisly sight of now only having one arm. He bent down and picked his sword up off the ground, then turned towards her, a furious rage swelling within. The muscles on his remaining arm surged and swelled, the rage in his face exposing no outer signs of pain. His devastating wound had been cauterized by the intense heat of her blast, leaving dark black burn marks where blood would have been pouring. The man yelled defiantly, cursing her for what she had done. Flames grew from his sword as though he had dipped it in lava. He took 2 furious steps towards her, then slashed the flaming sword in an arch, flinging molten drips and a fiery surge of energy towards her. The flames spat forward out of the tip of his sword like a geyser spews water from the earth. Samara gave all her thoughts to the light, allowing it to command her to create a shield around herself. The powerful yellow glow of the light radiated brilliantly as the protective barrier formed. The flames from the fiery sword struck the shield, strange hissing crackles sending miniature bolts of lightning spewing off either side of her shield. Electric shocks arched between the inside of her shield and her body, zapping her with painful magic jolts. She released the shield, not able to stand the pain of the electricity any longer, and dove out of the way of the remaining fire blast. Rolling from her back to her feet, she shot her eyes towards her should-be-dead opponent. The man stomped towards her, flames burning beneath his footsteps as he held his blazing blade high in the air. The light shot an idea into her mind. Accepting everything that it told her without question, she raised her hands high above her head. Channeling all of the energy that she could muster, she called forth a beam of light from the heavens to come down and strike the tip of the sword. His eyes radiated with pure, blind power, his pupils like an unquenchable storm. He tensed his arm, ready to slice Samara in half. Light, descending from the heavens, commanded its justice, striking the tip of his blade. The sword crackled with energy, lightning coursing down the metal into the man's powerful body. The hairs on Samara's head and neck stood upright as powerful energy sparked and zapped. Arcs of electricity connected with the ground all around the man in a powerful, deadly display. As the energy peaked, a loud boom followed, and a surge of electrical energy knocked Samara to the ground. The light surged within her as her eyes met the sight of the man's shattered sword next to his crumpled body. Justice had been served. The light commanded that she continue, that she seek for more evildoers to reprimand. Her mind felt like it might explode, that the energy that coursed through her body would consume her. With the ounce of control that she still held, she forced her second mind to enter her body, closing the connection before the light could protest. Her entire body tingled with energy, her breathing was heavy and deep, as though she had just finished swimming up a swiftly flowing river. It took several seconds for her to calm down enough to even think straight. Once she did, the immediate remembrance of Torin shot into her mind. She spied him, still lying motionless on the ground in the distance. With wobbly legs, she pushed herself towards him, praying that he was still alive. Torin lay unmoving upon the ground, his chest completely motionless, his breathing non-existent. "Uthren!" Samara screamed, tears full of fear ripping themselves from her eyes. "Uthren! Help!" She looked down at her childhood friend, her hands trembling as footsteps swiftly approached her.
Samara, what happened?
"It was... He got him in the chest. I don't..."
Uthran gently pushed Samara to the side, assessing the damage for himself. He placed his hand on Torn's chest, rubbing it up and down his ribcage slowly. Finally, he turned towards her, grabbing her by the shoulders.
Samara, listen to me. You must get control of yourself. Torn has no pulse. His ribs are also completely collapsed. I need your help to save him.
Samara could hardly breathe, the intensity of the situation threatening to cause her to black out.
Look at me,
Uthran commanded, then softer he repeated,
Samara, look at me. Look into my eyes.
She did so. Uthran's bright blue eyes were like glowing sapphires. The wrinkles around the edges of his eyes were soft, yet overwhelmingly determined.
You can do this, he said. I know you can. I'm going to have to get his heart started. I need you to mend his ribs while I restart his heart. Do you understand me?
Samara could barely interpret his words, but nodded, taking a deep breath to try and calm herself.
Get ready.
Uthran pulled his hands to his chest, creating the symbol of light. His fingers then expertly shifted, creating a new symbol that Samara didn't recognize. His hands and eyes then began to radiate an electric blue color, sparking with intense energy. Samara shook her head, taking another deep breath before pulling her hands into the symbol of light. Once again, she felt the power of the light fill her body as her second mind opened.
Please, she thought, all I want to do is heal him. Just heal my friend.
Ready?
Uthran asked, rubbing his hands together. Samara nodded, watching the lightning that coursed between his fingers as it sparked and began to hum gently.
Now!
Uthran yelled, pressing his hands into Torn's chest. Samara slapped her hands down onto Torn's limp body, feeling as the light began to pour from her palms and radiate into her friend. Torn's body jolted, a zapping sound echoing around him as the energy from Uthran's hands filled his body. Samara felt the energy spark against her hands as well, but she refused to take her hands off her friend. Uthran rubbed his hands together again, the energy slightly more intense this time.
Come on, boy,
he whispered. Samara repeated a prayer in her mind over and over again, tears streaming down her face. Uthran hit Torin with a second blast, then a third, and a fourth. A choked cry exited her mouth as Torin's chest suddenly began to rise. She watched as the bones in his chest started placing themselves back in their place, his lungs once again filling with the life-giving air that he so needed.
That's it, Samara. Keep it up.
Uthran rubbed his hands together one last time, slapping them down on Torin's body. The blast of lightning hit his body once again, and Torin's eyes shot open, a massive gasp of air forcing its way into his lungs. Samara began to cry as Torin gently laid his head back on the ground, coughing as he continued to suck in shallow gasps of breath. Uthrin sat back on his legs, his hands rising to his forehead in what looked to be a prayer of thanks.
"You really gave us a scare there, Torin,"
he said, lowering a hand and placing it on Torin's forehead. Torin coughed, his lips curling into a smile.
"Yeah, I totally got you guys, huh?"
He winced in pain as the words came out. "Torin, don't talk!" Samara exclaimed, tears still streaming from her eyes. Torin chuckled softly and let his head rest on the ground.
"Fine by me."
Uthrin placed a strong hand on Samara's shoulder, then rose to his feet.
"Samara, I need to go find Geode and Silas. You stay here and tend to Torin. I'll be right back."
Samara nodded, the power of the light finally finding a good balance within her as it flowed its healing power into her lifelong friend. Uthrin ran in the darkness towards two silhouettes in the night. Bodies of fire mages that Melos had sent were scattered everywhere. He took a quick glance, relieved that it appeared that the battle was finally over. Approaching the figures, he found Geode sitting with Silas near several crippled bodies.
"Are you both all right?"
"Yes, we're fine,"
Geode responded. He put a gentle, loving arm around Silas.
"Silas here gave us a bit of a scare, but we're both okay."
"What happened?"
Geode remained silent, his strong, kind eyes not wavering from their place. Silas looked down, obviously ashamed of the events that had just transpired. I don't know," Silas started. "I was chasing after one of the archers who was shooting arrows at you two. He shot a couple arrows at me, but I blocked them with my light shield." He looked down at his calf, a tear in his pant legs exposing his skin. "A different archer from behind me got me in the leg. It hurt so bad. I immediately lost control of my second mind, and it closed. The two archers saw that I was defenseless and ran up to me. They told me to give them the stone. Then one of them drew a sword and stabbed me in the shoulder." Silas's voice started to quiver. Geode moved his hand to his back and slowly rubbed for comfort. I didn't know what to do. I thought they were going to kill me. Then I just kind of snapped. It all happened so fast. I tried to use nature magic, like Geode did, to use the vines from the trees nearby to grab them. But I must have done something wrong. My leg and shoulder hurt so bad. I just wanted the pain to go away. I wanted the man who had stabbed me to die." Silas looked down at his leg and placed a hand over his shoulder. No wounds were there to be seen, only tears in his clothing. "Then they did. Both of them. Several others ran towards me after that. I felt the power flowing through me again. I must have blacked out before they got to me. But the next thing I knew, all these bodies were around me. I had no pain, and Geode was shaking me." Uthrin looked at Geode for further explanation. Geode continued rubbing Silas's back for comfort.
"Somehow, Uthrin,"
Geode started.
"Silas combined nature and darkness together. Not only that, but he also cast a very advanced, a very, well, dark spell at all of them. He used life magic, Uthrin, the combination of darkness and nature. I've heard of what these types of spells can do, how they seem to drain the very life from your enemies."
Geode pulled his hands from Silas's back, his eyes full of concern.
"He wasn't the Silas that we know in the moment that I found him. He had killed all of these men, draining their life force and using it to heal himself. I saw what was happening from a distance, but by the time I arrived, he had already fallen unconscious."
Silas stifled a choked cry, wiping at his eyes with the back of his hand. "Uthrin, what's wrong with me? Why do things like this keep happening?" Uthrin placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, more questions than answers swimming through his mind.
"I'm not sure, Silas, but I promise you we are going to figure it out. We had better leave this place. I don't know if there are any more people after us nearby or not, but I don't want to find out. Can you keep going?"
Wiping the tears from his eyes, Silas nodded. Uthrin patted him on the shoulder.
I promise I'll do everything in my power to figure out what's going on with you and help you. Samara and Torin should be ready to continue soon. I have to make sure they're all right. Meet us over there when you're ready.
Uthrin stood, giving one last look of helpless concern, then ran off towards Torin and Samara.
You are sure you're okay, Silas?
Geode asked.
I don't know, Silas said, wiping the tears from his eyes. I think so. Thanks for helping me, Geode. I'm sorry for all the trouble I've caused. This is all my fault. Everything. If we would have never gone down into the ancient crypt, I would have never found this amulet or the stone, and we wouldn't be in this mess.
Geode grabbed Silas and pulled him into a loving embrace.
No, Silas, don't you dare think that. It's because of you that we have some troubles, yes, but it will also be because of you that we can stop Melos. Without you, we never would have had the chance.
Geode released Silas from the embrace and stood up, extending a hand towards him. Silas gripped his mentor's hand and pulled himself to his feet.
You keep your chin up. Before this war is over, we'll all question why we were called to endure our pains and trials. In the end, we'll never truly know until the next life. But it is a surety that when we find out, we'll know that our trials and tribulations were for our own good and experience. Now come on, let's get out of here.
Every crack of a stick beneath someone's boot or the chirp of an animal in the night sent their hearts racing. Uthrin helped to finish healing Torin, and they counted their blessings that everyone was able to walk away from the encounter alive. Luckily for them, the rest of the night came and went without incident, and they found a secluded place to finish the night off with an hour or two of sleep. The next morning, they awoke and immediately continued their journey, taking another alternate path to try and throw Melos off their trail towards Gelendor. During their morning travels, Uthrin inquired as to what happened to each of them during the attack the night before. Torin recounted his events with the man that all of a sudden got super buff, and Samara filled in the minor details. She then recounted her battle with him, and asked Uthrin what technique he'd used to get so strong.
One of the more useful spells in fire magic is to use it to enrage your body, Uthrin explained. Geode did the same thing when he pulled the arrow from his arm last night. When you use that spell, your body is much more resistant to pain, and you increase your strength several times over. You also become extremely aggressive and cocky, so it needs to be used with caution. When in that state, it's easy to find yourself doing stupid things just to show dominance and power, like that man did when catching Torin's sword in his hand.
Yeah, that was crazy, Torin exclaimed. I knew I was in trouble when he did that. Good thing Samara came to save the day.
He gave Samara a playful yet grateful smile. The other thing that I wanted to ask you about, Uthrin, Samara continued, was what happened when the light and the fire collided. It looked like it was making lightning. Do you know why that would have happened?
Your observations are amazing, Samara, Uthrin replied. You are correct. Fire and light combine to create lightning. I used the same technique last night to jolt Torin's heart back into action. Although neither of you were intentionally combining both elements, because the two magic energies struck each other, they were able to produce the same effect.
Uthrin shook his head slowly, his old lips curling upward.
You children are continuing to surprise me every day. Samara, it's extremely rare that someone of your experience is able to discover new spells so rapidly. I would even call it prodigious. You might have already discovered your natural attunement. Either way, I believe that you will one day become a mighty light mage.
His voice growing a bit more gruff, he continued.
I would caution you, however, in allowing your second mind that much control in the future. While it can be extremely powerful to always give in to its suggestions, if you are not careful, it can cause you to do things that you may regret before you can stop yourself. Think about the time where Silas lashed out at me during our training by accident. When you allow your second mind to rule and control your actions, accidents are much more likely to happen. Nevertheless, I think you did amazing last night, and I commend you for your actions."
Samara blushed, but the warning rang through loud and clear. "Thanks, Uthrin. I promise I'll try not to let it take control again." Uthrin nodded in approval and then continued.
"As for you, Silas, I've been thinking greatly about what happened last night. I believe I've come to several conclusions. How accurate they are is another matter in itself. Anyway, as I believe that Samara is naturally attuned to light magic, I think that you have also found your natural attunement. I think that you may be naturally gifted with darkness."
Silence fell upon the group, all eyes darting towards Silas. No, it can't be darkness. I don't even know what the symbol of darkness is. It just can't be. I don't know. He stopped, his eyes growing wide with realization.
"Silas, what is it?"
Uthrin asked. Silas clenched his lips together, shaking his head, as though he could nullify the truth. The more that he resisted, the deeper the realization sunk. He finally looked towards his mentor, then recounted the part of his vision where he saw himself in the mirror. He explained the awful scene of his reflection making a strange symbol, then using what looked like darkness magic. Silence continued to surround the group, a chill wind blowing past them, causing eerily cold shivers to run up their spines. Silas continued, telling him about the graveyard that he found himself in, and the large tomb with a skull above the door. He also recounted how there were thousands of animated skeletons, their eyes glowing with a dark, purple light. He once again visited the scene of his reflection, and how his reflection made a symbol, which he now guessed was the symbol of darkness. He told them about the massive mountains that he had been transported to, and the immaculate statue of what looked to be a powerful warrior. How inside of the great mall, he saw something glowing brightly. Finally, he talked about seeing Melos, and the pain that he felt as he looked into his cold, dark eyes.
"Silas, can you show me the symbol that your reflection made? Do you remember it?"
Geode asked, breaking the silence. Silas stopped walking, his mind calling to remembrance the images of his nightmarish vision. He could almost see his reflection in his mind, smiling back at him with that unnatural grin. He brought his hands together, making 2 circles with his pointer finger and thumb, then touched them together. He then extended the 3 other fingers on both of his hands and touched them together, arching them over the circles. He then proceeded to twist his hands forward, making the symbol appear upside down. Another gust of chill wind blew past them as he finished the symbol. Leaves scattered across the ground, as if they were trying to get away to a new resting place. Uthrin looked at Geode, deep concern in his eyes.
"It's not all bad,"
Geode said, his voice lightening the mood slightly.
"Perhaps darkness is your natural attunement. Maybe it isn't. Maybe it's just the connection you've developed with Melos and the stone that's bringing it out."
Geode placed a firm hand on his shoulder, waiting for Silas to meet his eyes before continuing.
"Either way, it doesn't change the fact that you are Silas, that you have been called to carry a difficult burden, and that you have the potential to do great good in this world. Not all darkness mages are evil, Silas. It may seem that way, but there was a time, even not that long ago, where there were many good users of darkness that walked the earth. As Uthrin explained before, darkness is not inherently evil. It's just easier to lean that way with it a bit more than the other elements."
Geode ruffled Silas's hair, smiling.
"You know, fire is actually closer to darkness than you'd think. When I use fire magic, I have to be sure to keep my thoughts and desires under control, so I don't do anything I'll regret later. It has a lot to give, but it's up to you to make sure you use it the right way. It's become a lot easier to control over the years, but the urges still come. I've done a lot less with darkness, but I know my fair share, and it's very similar. It really is an incredible element. It almost feels like it guides you throughout the learning process, like it's eager to allow you to become great. In truth, I've been meaning to train with darkness a bit more myself. Perhaps I've put it off a bit too long. I think that you, Silas, could become an excellent, powerful, and upstanding darkness mage."
"You really think so?"
"I know so. Let's get some more of the basics of light down. Maybe throw in a little nature here and there. But after that, I promise I'll teach you what I know about darkness. You should really master the element that is strongest to you, so if you're naturally gifted with it, there's no reason why you shouldn't learn it. We'll do it the right way, the good way.
Silas wrapped Geode in a hug, his chest feeling like a massive weight had just been lifted from it. Thank you, Geode. Thank you. I don't want to be naturally attuned to darkness, but if I am, then I'd want to learn how to use it from you. Geode smiled, returning the hug.
I'm actually kind of excited. There's a lot of really powerful stuff that I'm missing out on. We'll learn it all together. It's going to be great.
Uthrin nodded his head, giving a silent thanks to Geode.
As for the other parts of your vision, it may have been a message from the gods themselves. Based on what you saw, I believe I might know where the Stone of Light is. I think I know what statue you saw. If I am correct, it's in the light capital of Sindemir. If the stone really is inside of that statue, then our quest to find all of the stones just got one step easier. Once we have visited Gelendor and done what we need to do, we can go search for it.
Uthrin started walking again and motioned for everyone to follow.
If we pick up our pace, I believe we can make it to Gelendor within a couple more days. Once there, we'll be able to rest with ease. Make haste, and may the light guide us.